thank you Tech Plus Media for having this opportunity to kind of speak on the topic of zero trust, especially in the IT/OT convergence era. And we've actually seen in today's times where businesses essentially have been really transforming. The transformation essentially has been in the uh, areas of digital advanced solutions, like business intelligence, artificial intelligence, a high degree of cloud adoption, and of course, last but not the least, we've seen IoT play a major role in terms of helping businesses transform today. So from that perspective, while there has been an adoption of fair amount of assets which essentially come under the operational technology purview, we've also seen that it also brings its own set of risk, especially in the cyberspace. So today's discussion, we are going to be discussing about, how does zero trust really essentially play a role in the operational technology and the information technology convergence? What are the monitoring controls that one can apply? What is the governance and framework mechanism that essentially one could look into? What is the vulnerability scenario? And essentially, the various principles that one looks at from a zero trust standpoint. What are the principles that will be really applicable to this perspective? And today's CISO who are really concerned, given that they are into this business of operational technology, and today's cyber attacks and incidents are really growing in this space as well. How does zero trust really help them reduce those sleepless nights? With that, I will go to my first question, and my first question is to Ambarish Singh. Ambarish, as we've seen today, uh, most of the critical infrastructure operators essentially have been digitizing their equipment. Uh, how has their overall cyber posture really impacted in terms of vulnerabilities to those attacks? Has digitization really helped, or it's only complicated the whole scenario?
Sure. Thanks, Akshay, for asking that great question. See, first of all, majority of this digital transformation journey which organization have taken is a majority of the decisions are business driven, because traditionally a lot of organizations were very reluctant, which got into this journey due to a lot of them due to the pandemic, due to the business ask, business pressure, and a lot of things has to do with the initial reluctance was they were reluctant to, there were fear of failure. Okay, now today they have seen what the newest technology, digital technology can play a role in transforming your business. They have seen the newest company, like a bunch of companies you talk about, we do everyday business, right? So that they have adopted, but during this adoption, the entire threat landscape has changed. Whatever everything you talk about your traditional application, you talk about API integration. When you talk about digital transformation, right? You want to leverage the cloud, you want to leverage the data analytics, you want to leverage what is the data lake, correct? You want to have a IIoT, CIoT, RPA, a bunch of bots, etc. Right? So if you are trying to leverage these technologies, your data, you are going to expose a lot of things to the third parties. That is where your threat landscape is changing. Today, you have a bunch of applications which are on-prem. Once you're going to leverage, you want to move to a cloud, you need to ensure that what kind of data is getting exposed, how do you migrate? It's a very tedious task. You have to do thorough assessment, what kind of exposure you have today, or what kind of exposure you're going to have on cloud. Because right. Entire infra ecosystem is going to change. I just take a quick example of, you talk about you are building a IoT product or CIoT product. Okay, when there's a customer requirement that he should be able to access his part of whatever he is doing, looking at this, you want to give access to every customer, you are exposing a lot of things to the customer so as to the threat actors. That is where your entire assessment of the vulnerability threat has to come into play, and make sure that you are looking at the security from chip to cloud rather than looking in silos. If you talk about firmware itself, you talk about connectivity, app, web infrastructure, and network infrastructure, which is hosted on cloud, could be hosted on cloud. Okay, things becomes more complex when you get into the OT world. because OT world, probably you know that you cannot upgrade and update, because OEM, if you ask OEM to upgrade, it is the cost of upgradation is huge. So how to strike a balance, that is a huge task for the majority of the CISO, those who are working in manufacturing. How to strike a balance between the operations and the security when you want to leverage or you want to monitor certain parameters, you want to shift the data out of the OT network to cloud or in IT environment. How do you want to segregate both the networks? That is a big challenge. And a lot of steps has been taken at various organizations, but still there is a challenge. So in a nutshell, digital transformation has given a lot of opportunity to the businesses. At the same time, a lot of threats and vulnerability it has exposed. We as a CISO, we need to look at various granular lens, look at strategic level, what kind of probably security landscape you are going to have to encounter all such new threats, which we have never encountered before. Yeah, so that were my initial thoughts.
Sure. No, I think very valid points. What I really like in terms of the point you mentioned was the security has to be from the chip level to the application or upwards, rather than basically looking at only the application layer. With that, I'll just move this question to Inderjeet ji. Inderjeet ji, if you can just help us understand. So we've seen actually various frameworks talk about various principles. One of the framework talks about the three principles of zero trust. One is basically when you look at you authenticate, but you verify at all times. Second is you assume least privilege, and third is that again you assume a breach, right, at any point in time. So how would you apply these three principles essentially to an OT or an IoT environment? And what are some of the leading practices that you would like to recommend to the CISOs of today?
So, of course, thank you very much for having me for this discussion. And it's a very interesting topic. And just to give you a prelude of primarily what a zero trust is, and then I'll further, enhance the scope of the discussion. And why it has become very important, because all the OT networks were being air gapped, right? And we had only the OT side on the one part and on the IT on the other, and then the industry 4.0 came in, and we are all moving the IoT devices and have the things in cloud, right? When we talk of the traffic aspect of it, the normal IT traffic, when we look at it, it's around 17% of the traffic is the outsourced traffic, and that is what is being monitored, right? And even if we talk of the IIoT traffic on the industry 4.0, that's what is the traffic we are monitoring through VPN, the IPS, IDS, and the firewalls. Now, the remaining 83 to 85% of the traffic is never being monitored. That's the east-west traffic. And that is where the concern actually lies, right? And that is where we bring in the zero trust. That means trust no one. And erstwhile, what we were doing was that between the IT and OT, if you are to really access the data, either you're using a VPN or you're using, only in a very timed manner where we are trying to upgrade or update the systems in the OT, right? And this was a mere, nightmare altogether. Whereas now the zero trust model, which we are talking of today, can deal with all the modern attacks. And while we talk of you don't trust your device, you don't trust your process, you don't trust your people, right? So you have different kind of concepts which you apply. You talk of micro segmentation, you define a software defined network, or you talk of multi-factor authentication. So those are the kind of things which you try to implement, right? And this is the method where you are trying to enhance the security of the OT network with the advanced tools, right? And instead of the normal current security measures, what you are using, you enhance the security overlay with the zero trust, and it actually gives you the extra layer of the security on top of your existing network. But with the zero trust approach, particularly a CISO can control and manage the complete access to the OT network, and who is being working on that devices for how long, and in case you have any remote vendor, if he's using it and he's been given access to the network, after he's been authorized, instead of tunneling them into the network, he can have the policies which can be created and he can be given access to. And you can also have the sessions which are the governance with the zero trust. And by the way, the zero trust is more for the policy processes and the governance aspect rather than any product per se, right? And it also gives the better performance in the OT network. And like most of the time, like people use VPNs in the OT to communicate, right? And that's quite a bulky process and a slow process. Here, it gives you quite an enhancement when you're using the zero trust. So it's again a advantage what you have using the zero trust, and it also gives you the better accountability. So that is the another factor which is of importance. And you enforce policies, you can monitor sessions, you can do the recording that enables the CISO to have a bigger control over the network, better control of the complete network security, and practically it will give that kind of a confidence which a CISO is practically looking in for.
Sure. Thank you. I think some of the good practices you mentioned, micro-segmentation, zero factor authentication, and some of the areas that you said in terms of not only a technology but also a process from a zero trust standpoint is something that one needs to apply. And my next question is to Pradipta. And Pradipta, this question is more on the SCADA networks, especially where we see various applications of SCADA. We've also seen certain environments where you've got remote terminal units to basically analyze these SCADA environments. And when I say remote terminal units, obviously there is a lot of information exchange, more so in terms of data extraction and analytics. So what do you think in terms of some of the leading practices that need to be taken into consideration around SCADA? And there has been a lot of central repository of information around this SCADA system. So what do you think would be the some of the best practices, especially while applying these privileges or these principles around zero trust?
In fact, the zero trust we are talking about is a no trust to whether it is IT or OT or the people, process, technology, all three aspects of life. So the point is here, if you're talking about OT per se, and IT was every time we have worked upon very well, and that structure, technology, process, people, everything was in place. Today, the OT is converged with IT because the digital transformation, it is happening on the OT side as well. Whether it is the productivity side of it, revenue side of it, whether it is remotely you can manage the way digital twins, kind of that RPA, a lot of technology into it. So we definitely have to have those OT converge with IT. There is no other way. And also at the same time, we are moving towards the cloud. That means this OT devices today, which is already getting into the cloud, exposed into cloud. Definitely it is not that easy because it's earlier a different island altogether. Today it is a part of an ecosystem. We need to secure those OT environment in different processes. First of all, I can take it up is that you have to have your micro segmentations. Today, if I'm talking about OT, we should know what are the OT traffics, whether it is coming through your sensors or your RTU or your SCADA or your ICS. What are the things, what are the traffic it is coming? It is a backnet traffic or it is your different protocol traffics. We should understand those particular piece, and we'll see that how we can have the different segment altogether. At the same time, we have to ensure that how that OT environment can be accessible through the secure channel, the communications. The network is one part of it. Second thing, the micro-segmentation part of it. Third is, as we know that there are a couple of challenges, as Mr. Ambarish and Mr. Kumar is already highlighted, there are certain legacy systems. Those systems are not being upgraded to over the night or the years of time. It is a lot of investment, capex investment into it. So how to manage those OT assets, because they are exposed to now to the cloud, whether it is public, private, hybrid, that depends upon the environment and the requirement of the business. But that is unavoidable. Like anyhow, we have to expose to some places to have those efficiency, bringing those productivities, bringing those the production, bringing those the supply chain to be more faster and agile methods. So that is where it is going. Even though there is a standard called Lighthouse, it has been like, more of that industry 4.0 you are talking about. So there is also have that automations. You have to have a lot of things to be automated. The assembly line, if you get into the productivity to improve, of course, you have to have your automation in place. In the same time, can I do it without main intervention or manual intervention? And also managing monitoring remotely. Yes, of course, the command and control. We can have your all kind of manufacturing plants or power plants or any machineries can be controlled through the remotely, through your digital twin methods, or might be having the robotic process, might be having the RPA processes. So we need to ensure the traffic, how the traffic is moving and where it is moving. And we need to profiling those part of it. Who is accessing the traffic? That is almost important for your identity and access management we are talking about. Today, the operator of SCADA operator, the manager level people, he is looking into and monitoring those power plant, or might be some of the assembly line. Definitely, he should be identifiable. He should be like, more or less profile what level of access he can have to those OT devices. So we need to have that IAM part to be more stronger part of it. And the third important part is also have to have whatever that access we have given, it should be verified always. And it should be have also some authenticated devices. That means it is not only the user profiling you have to do, it's also have to do your device profiling. See, the person who is accessing, like, it should ensure that those things to be taken care of it. So that the person will be accessing from, let's say, from India, for some of the places, industrial places, the next time if you have given VPN to them, he should not access the same traffic, should not come from Russia, or might be some all other third countries of the world. So you need to have the geofencing, so that if something was happening, that should be also triggered to your place. Okay, of how come this is possible? So this is one of the integration we have to do with the SIM, where their platform called SOR also. SOR, it is moving, and like, more or less people organization getting into this. Now these OT devices should be monitored or create those events, and you have to be monitor those and alerts as well. So that should be integrated with SIM. It is not only the server, router, firewalls to be integrated with the systems or SIM. It should be also integrated to those OT devices, so that we can immediately get those events faster, live, and those, so that we can take corrective actions or response faster. Though having said that, there are a lot of frameworks which already available. If you can see the refer to the NIST, all critical infrastructure, whether it is a power energy sector, or might be distribution sector, or supply chain, or the defense, or the water supplies, or the any utility, say, all those things to be already there, the best practices in place. We urge you our team to be or the CISO or the CIO, or might be that plant heads to looking to those particular controls should be in place for the OT. On that perspective, if you can take out people, process, technology, and culture at the last, has to be tightly integrated to each other, and having that more threat intelligence enabled, so that we can take a right action and correct action on the right time. And that is important for all of us. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Pradipto. And I think very insightful thought process that you shared with us. And I think, I've learned so much through this discussion. You spoke about areas on how the transformation is happening, the need to market from a faster agility on supply chain, industry 4.0 coming our way. Of course, automation is the need of the hour. You need to basically have fair degree of access control, both at the assembly line and the SCADA level. You also spoke about user profiling. SCADA operators, in terms of how much of access control should they have, and do we apply the principle of verifying always? Also, how do you kind of profile the devices on a risk-based approach, and how do you kind of conduct geofencing? Then last but not the least, in talks you spoke about how do you kind of get the SOAR platform from a monitoring and incident analysis perspective, and how you're able to pick up the needle from the haystack, and then of course referring to some of the leading practices defined by NIST and other standards on OT. So thank you so much for that holistic approach. There is one area that I think we should definitely cover from an overall OT perspective, and that's the endpoint. And I think endpoint is something that cannot go unnoticed. And my question, here to Krishnan is that when you talk about any endpoint protection, right, specifically endpoints which are accessing these kind of systems, endpoint which carry information from an OT standpoint, how do you basically apply the zero trust framework, and really is it significant to apply the zero trust framework in the first place? And then how would this principle really contribute in terms of minimizing the risk?
Yeah, so endpoint security is the key thing in the whole cybersecurity framework. When I'm talking about this endpoint specifically for this OT environment, I'll just go with your messaging, which you mentioned earlier, which is about the verifications of the devices or the endpoints, which is connecting, and then the micro segmentations, as well as the assumed breach into the network. So how the protection should be based on these three criteria. So here, when we talk about the endpoint, someone spoke about this identification is the key thing. Yes, we need to have the applications to provide those identifications, and then the endpoint could extend to provide those identifications for the endpoints. And also it can be used to provide the visibility of the devices which they're connecting with. And this gives us profiling, or if you want to do the posture check on the verification level, whether the employee who is connecting is the authentic user, that can be done by the two-factor authentications, and along with that, by integrating with the network access control kind of solutions, you can make sure that the endpoint comes with the specific posture check they install with the set of software before they get into the network. So that is on the verification point. Now we make sure that on the verification point, like the device is an authentic device, and importantly, the device is hygiene enough to get into the network with the authentic users. And then the next part is the micro segmentation. Now, in the micro segmentation, specifically, we always talk about the micro segmentation on the network part, but this can be extended to the user level by grouping this user so that you can have the policy between the groups. Or example, there might be the third-party vendors might be coming inside the OT environment to maintain the PLCs, or it could be the different operators who might be coming in. So we need to differentiate this third-party vendors from the operators who might be part of the enterprises or part of the company itself. So there, you can define those policies as like a micro-segmentation, so that the operators shouldn't talk to the PLCs vendors directly, or there should not be there should be a tight control on the policy between them. And also, when they're getting into the network, they have to provide the respective policies on the firewall level as well as on the different component level on the OT environment. And then the next is the assumed breach. So here, normally when we talk about the OT environment, unlike IT, we don't deploy all the technology in one go, right? It goes in a phase-wise approach. It starts with the minimal security control, and it goes to the advanced threat protection kind of security components inside the OT environment. So the endpoint, the key things on the endpoint solution is it should accommodate both the solutions. So the endpoint should be able to do the identification part, as well as based on the policy should be able to do the micro-segmentation. And going forward, for controlling the breach, it should be able to do the advanced threat protections. And also, it also support the kind of EDR solution, so that it also not only the known threat, it also address the unknown threat by identifying the threat and taking the protection at the correct level. So yeah, so the endpoint is the key thing, and it is very important on the OT environment. And this is not basically for the operators or the third-party vendors who is coming from outside, but also this HMI's application which resides on the OT environment. These applications might be the old operating systems, and when we are looking for the endpoint, especially this EDR solutions to protect it from those known and unknown threats, it needs to support those old operating systems in terms of controlling it from the vulnerabilities, applications, as well as controlling from the unknown threat also. Yeah, so that's my take on the endpoint solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Krishnan. And my next question is essentially to Sachin. And Sachin, probably this question is a slight outlier, but I'll still go ahead and ask it. And this question is, more on the role of the boards today. And boards have been asking a couple of questions in the cyberspace. Very simple questions like, how secure are we? Are we ready for an incident? And if so, then what is essentially our incident response plan and readiness to minimize the impact of the incident, and then how do we apply the learnings for any future reoccurrences? Now, if we apply all these questions essentially to the IT OT environment, first question is that would zero trust really kind of answer those questions? Number one. And number two, let's flip the table here and also understand what is the responsibility of the board in terms of supporting such kind of initiatives.
Sure. No, thanks, Akshay. That's actually very good and very valid question, given how the transformation is unfolding, and if you look at how the modernization is taking place, and I'll take maybe some cues from Pradipta as well, the way he mentioned about the transformation, and there are some companies who are struggling with the legacy systems, and there are companies who are trying to modernize, and there are some companies who have moved ahead. And in every facet of this transformation, you are bound to face a lot of challenges, and this challenge is not around setting up the people, process, and technologies right, but also to educate the board. And I think when we come across, even I've seen during my consulting assignments also with some of the companies, when we were doing some risk governance and even analytics work, and you would see the difference in their understanding, their knowledge, and even the kind of risk appetite and the understanding of the overall risk framework. I think that is also something which has to come on the shoulder of CISOs or maybe CIOs to ensure that the board, the management also understand that part very well. And what is happening, I think, if I talk about, let's say, maybe the situation 5 years ago, I think a lot of board members, or maybe even when the questions from CFOs were, did this happen before? Is our industry exposed to some of these threats? And justifying some of those investments, justifying their involvement in those security-driven decisions, I think it was a big challenge. But given how some of these events have unfolded, and how some of these incidents have disrupted the supply chain, even in energy sector, I think Pradipta was mentioning about the power generation and power distribution plant. I think we have seen some of these events disrupting the business in all parts of the world, and across all industries. And it's not limited only to companies who have maybe a high degree of exposure to the cloud, or maybe high degree of exposure to the internet. And with this modernization and automation, you're bound to have that exposure, whether you want it or not. I think you're bound to have that exposure. And given the data, which is actually of critical importance, and along with that, the biggest part for some of the big companies is actually the reputational risk and disruption in their business, which can also hit the revenue very hard. And I know in some of the cases, in some of the global events, losing customer is actually as a painful task, and it's equally painful to get them back. And I think given what is happening, I do not see major issues these days. I mean, I'm talking about in today's context, when you have to explain what is that kind of threat landscape you're dealing with, and most of the boards, I think they can understand easily, I mean, what we are talking about in terms of risk, and more importantly, they want to see an integrated view of the risk, and they do not want to see the risk in isolation. They want to see the threat landscape, how it is going to impact the business. And as you rightly mentioned, most of the time, the first question is, are we secure enough? Are we doing enough? And that is also, and the good thing is I've heard, I mean, though not in many cases, but even in my last organization, I heard this question, are we investing enough? This question actually is something which gives a lot of confidence, not to just to the board, but to the security leader and the team he or she is managing, that the board is equally involved, board is equally participating. And that is all about how good you are at educating the board, how good the board itself or learn about what is happening in the industry. I mean, I think that transformation is something which goes not just by the technology, but even the business people, how they are actually looking at it. And I think that is something which is providing enough, I can say, enough protection and a sort of security layer to the entire business they are doing, and the transformation journey which has begun. And the last point, I think the pandemic has also been that serious thought to everyone, and they have seen the disruption. They have seen how exposed this can be, whether it's related to business continuity or even maybe work from home scenarios, how disruptive or serious it can be. I think that has also given a shift in the thinking, how the board is looking at not just the investment, but also the advancement in some of the security technologies.
Sure. Thank you, Sachin. I think that's a pretty rounded view that you shared with us. Thank you so much. And my next question is to Udit. So Udit, we've seen that couple of assets in the form of either equipments or machines essentially are getting more and more connected, more and more smarter, right? For example, let's take an example of a connected car, right? So just wanted to get your views in terms of how does this basic convergence extend to IoT technologies, and what are the key considerations in a zero trust that can be looked into from an IoT standpoint?
So we need to understand that when we take up any IoT device, you mentioned a connected car, it's a very sophisticated IoT device. I will take a very small example like a smartwatch or a BP monitor or a heart rate monitor, which a patient wears. That's a very basic device. And, it comes with bare minimum, let me call it operating system, where it connects to a network and passes on the information. Most of these devices are built with, sorry to say, negligible thought towards, cyber security or information security. And these are the challenges that one faces from a security standpoint in how do I secure these? Traditionally, when we talk about zero trust being implemented, the first thought that comes is I may have an IP address, or I may have something to trace back on, or identify. So the first challenge with IoT devices is to identify the device which is loitering around in my network, which is there. So you first identify the device. You need tools. How would you identify? So to identify is what Pradipta mentioned. You would need an identity and access management in place. Once you identify the IoT device in your zero trust architecture network, the next is you need to study that device. I think this was also mentioned by someone earlier. Each device in the network is purpose built. Taking example, in India, you have a plethora of technologies running in a single organization, in a single plant. It can be from a plain drive in a machine to a very sophisticated SCADA, PLC, or MES connecting to the network. Now, each machine must be understood from the business perspective. And what is the impact of that machine in the upstream and downstream information flow of the business? That determines the role and criticality of that IoT device. How do you do this? Probably, I think Pradipta or someone mentioned that you need to go in for micro segmentation. This is where the micro segmentation comes in. And this is where probably you can use tools like a firewall or equivalents to write rules, which will identify, okay, this is a sensor, this is what it does, this is what it's supposed to do. So you write a very specific rule and micro segment it. That's the second step. Moving on, so I've identified, I have understood what the device does, and I have built rules for that device to work in a limited way. What's the third step in that? The third step is I start monitoring how this device is now behaving on my network. So this is with an intent to look at, are there any, is it susceptible to, a breach or break-in? That's third. You keep monitoring, and here, the modern day tools of AI for IT operations, where it looks at the logs and looks at how the behavioral pattern of the device, is it doing what it's supposed to do, or is it misbehaving? That is the identification which comes in. And then the last step is to evaluate the remote access and ensure that proper security and authentication is in place. This means that you keep updating that device on a regular basis from a security perspective. So when we talk about IoT devices, using them in the zero trust framework also requires a shift in the mindset of not only the users, but also the management. Because generally when people think about, a zero trust, the first thing that comes to mind is disruption to business. This is going to cause a lot of operational hurdles. It's going to ask me to go through simple things like when you enable multi-factor authentication. I'm not talking about dual, I'm talking about multi-factor authentication. There is a backlash from endpoint users. I'm sure all of you all will resonate to this. When you enable MFA or for a VPN user, he'll come back and say, I'm the employee, why do I have to do this over and over again, etc. So a parallel can be drawn to, if you travel from Delhi airport in and out on 25th of January or 14th of August, how many security checks are you subjected to? And if you travel on any other day, so probably on these special days, which are just a day before or a week before our Independence Day and the Republic Day, you go through at least 5 to 6 different levels of check. Why? That is to ensure that no untoward incidents happen. I'm trapping everything well before it occurs. Similar is the zero trust architecture when you bring in IoT. It may be a one-time exercise, but it is needed and it complements very well. So just to summarize, probably identifying the device which is present in the network, understanding the relevance to the business, the importance, and hence assigning it a role, monitoring the role of that device in the network to see whether it is behaving appropriately or not, and keeping it up to date from a security perspective. These are the 4 steps for an IoT device to be considered in the entire zero trust architecture and framework.
Sure, understand. So basically applying a role-based access in a risk model or a risk-based model, and then of course defining the access controls, and then defining what are the controls that you would like in the form of either micro-segmentation, two-factor authentication, and so on and so forth, and then defining the frequency of verification as well. As you rightly pointed out, security and convenience also has to go hand in hand. At the same time, not compromising security, but time to market is also important. So of course, respecting.
While I mentioned it in 4 simple steps, my peer panelists here will agree. When you look at a manufacturing setup, you can have the traditional RS port, you can have a Profibus port from where. So there is the possibilities of data communication are much more than just an RJ11 or RJ45 port for a device or a server, right?
Right.
That's what adds complexity from a device data access perspective. Next, you're bringing in the cloud. The data is moving from the machine onto your secured network through maybe a secure channel, but it's going into the cloud and residing there. That adds to the complexity. Third, you're bringing it, now we have the concept of M2M, machine to machine communication. You route that via the cloud, you're adding one more layer. So that's how these are the intricacies. When you consider IoT into a zero trust framework, you need to be very meticulous in identifying each and every element and ensuring that you provide for it.
Udit, thank you so much. I think this was a very, very insightful and very well interpreted discussion on the question. So thank you so much for that, Udit. Any concluding thoughts from anyone?
From zero trust perspective, I keep talking about stick to your basics. Ensure what you're doing today, how this is going to help you in zero trust journey. It is a multi-year strategic journey. So don't think that one day it can happen overnight. It will take a lot of time and a lot of shift from. So first the thinking has to shift, then your action will start shifting.
Yeah, I have one point to highlight. See, the incidental definitely bound to happen. Whatever the technology process and people around, something is going to happen. So how, and the cyber resiliency part, how we can respond it, how we can minimize the risks and controls are around. That is the key, to the cyber resiliency, what we can talk about. Moreover, how we can respond, that incident management response plan, or who's going to do what when something is going to happen. So because this is a practical experience, what we see certain time, nobody knows, something is going to happen in the mid of the night. But that is where the challenges come. So this is one key important. Second is your backup. Always you should ensure that your backups are stored or offline, or might be different places, so that if anything happens, you don't need to pay anything to the ransomware part. The way, if you see Colonial Pipeline, the US government has paid a lot of money to the ransomware partners to release those keys. So backup is also key, and DCP is another for the business per se. So this is the three elements. If you can have, then at least we can have the better cyber resiliency part of it to face those incident or events. Thank you.
In fact, Pradeep, though, I can tell you that some of the businesses today are adopting cyber crisis management to be a part of the overall crisis management. When I say overall crisis management, right from looking at various cases, right, like prevention of sexual harassment to insider trading to a power supply breakdown to essentially a cyber incident, forms a part of the overall crisis management. And incident response or a cyber incident response essentially becomes a part of the overall. So defining the call trees and also defining, at an advent of an incident, who is supposed to respond and how, and what is the reporting mechanism, and how do you basically apply all the learnings back into the system. So all of those essentially form a part of the cyber crisis management. So thank you so much for that.
I'll add, having a plan is important, but practicing that plan is more important.
Yeah, and one more thing I was just, before we close down, while we talk of the zero trust, that's one of the best solutions which are available today for securing OT network. Unified gateways are going to be another areas which we can always have a discussion around that. And it really follows the IEC 62443 protocol. And unified gateways are the way ahead, where you're going to overcome all the threats which are being posed by the firewalls, right? Where we always think of the firewalls are going to be compromised because they're a mere piece of software, right? And they're all compromised kind of thing with all the CVs on the internet. So unified gateways are again one way of looking at it. So complementing the zero trust with the unified gateway is going to be the way ahead in the OT security part of it.
Yeah, so maybe this I'd like to include on this vulnerability management part also, because since we have a lot of devices, maybe some of the HMIs may be running on the old operating system. So the vulnerability management is equally important in like other parameters what we discussed all this time. Whatever the cybersecurity framework or the security system we have, starting from the endpoint solution especially, that has to take care of the vulnerability also. So it has to take the response actions, not only based on this, whether the threat or the suspicious activities, but also it has to address the vulnerability part of those assets also. Yeah.
No, actually, very important. And in fact, when you look at integrating any of those feeds with your SIM, and then of course you have a SOAR platform, I think vulnerability information forms a very important constituent of actually correlating that information with the other events which may get categorized as incidents.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Thank you.
I would just like to add, the Joe Biden government in January 22 issued an executive order where they've made zero trust architecture deployment as mandatory for all federal services and other department bodies. So that itself is a testimony of how this technology is relevant and important in terms of bringing security measures closer to wherever you work from and trying to protect and minimize everybody from the plethora of cyber attacks which are refining themselves with every increasing day. So zero trust is the way forward. That's all I wanted to add.
As they say, trust no zero, trust no one. That is zero trust. So just on a lighter note. Right. So thank you so much, panelists. And, I think very insightful views. I've made my notes and I'm definitely going to take this as a key takeaway and a learning. So thank you so much for sharing your experience from your respective sectors and, all of that you go through on a daily basis. Thank you so much once again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For more updates from CXO TV, please like and subscribe to our channel.